Greetings and salutations. Welcome to The Jolt. This is my YouTube channel that coincides with my personal blog, thejolt.net. Now, typically, I discuss the UFO and the UAP phenomenon and everything that kind of correlates with it. However, this evening, I wanted to dive into other things of the paranormal and mysterious and metaphysical. All of these topics have just completely captivated me my entire life, and ever since I was old enough to read. And I attribute that to my grandfather, who had a subscription to Fate magazine. He was a major believer in the paranormal. And for those of you who don't know Fate, look it up. It's a classic magazine. It was a little one, wasn't very big. It was a small publication, but it always had stories of ghosts and demons and exorcisms and poltergeists and aliens and extraterrestrials. It was a fantastic magazine. It was kind of like the Reader's Digest of the paranormal. And I grew up reading it, loved it, every facet or every aspect of it. And one thing I wanted to talk about this evening is my personal experiences with the Ouija board. And I know there's a lot of skepticism and, a stigma surrounding the Ouija board, but I have a couple experiences that I've always felt have been compelling, to say the least, and have stuck with me through my life. And I want to share it because I think it's kind of neat. Might even be a little scary to some. So, but what is the Ouija board? Most of you know what a Ouija board is. Let me share a picture. Look at that. That's a classic, beautiful wooden one. And not much has changed since it first came out. 1891, as a matter of fact, is when it first came out. That's when headlines in newspapers, February of 1891, headlines in newspapers started to appear. And, talking of the Ouija, the wonderful talking board, and it all came from a Pittsburgh toy and novelty shop. It started by a guy by the name of Charles Bertrand, I think his name was. Let's see here. Hold on. I had it right here a second ago. He and another fellow, Charles Kennard, I beg your pardon, of Baltimore, Maryland, and of his partner, Elijah Bond, who was an attorney. They jumped on an opportunity, and I don't know how they actually found this board. They didn't create it. They found a makeshift example of it from, I guess, from some medium somewhere, but they made a novelty company, and boom, there it went. And they started it, and that's when it really started to get popular, was at the end of the 1800s. However, what led up to that, though, is, and all through the 19th century, spiritualism was abound in Western civilization, in America and in Europe, and there was a lot of mediums coming out, psychics, and seances. People were having seances, and before the actual Ouija board, what they would do is they would have a seance, and they would ask the spirit to provide a knock or a noise, relative to, to a numerical value relative to a letter. For example, spirit, please tell us your name, and use, for a letter B, use one knock, or A, let's say letter A, use one knock, letter B, use two, that kind of thing. And sometimes they would correlate it with specific words, and whatnot. But then it evolved into putting it to this board with a magical oracle. Anyway, to make a long story short, okay, let me share another picture here. I want to talk to you a little bit about my experience. And what my experience was, it started, when I was a kid, I guess you could say, in our late teens. Now, I grew up in Pennsylvania, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, outside of the northeast of Philadelphia. And it was an old historic area that I grew up in. I mean, our house was built in 1966, I believe. So there really wasn't a lot to say about the house itself. However, the land that it was on, that's a different story, because it was on a farm. It was built on an old farm. I'm going to show you a picture. Check this out. So look at that. As a matter of fact, let's build that up just a little bit. Okay, so if you walked out of our front door And down our front hill, we lived on a corner. Okay, you walk down our front hill, you would land in the street, walk up a little bit, and you would see this house up on the hill. This house right here was built in 1766, 10 years before the Declaration of Independence was signed. How do I know? Because there's a timestamp up here, this gable end. I remember it. This was an old spring house. There used to be a spring here that used to feed a stream that would go down the hill. So, and there were rumors and legends, I should say, that human remains were once found inside that spring house, left over from perhaps prisoners from the Revolutionary War. So very interesting to say the least. Anyway, so I grew up in that area where it's just full of history, full of old buildings and old energy. And there's a reason why I'm bringing this up, because this well house, this spring house, was mentioned by a spirit. And we'll get to that in a minute. But before I talk to you about the main story that really was probably the strongest manifestation I ever had come through the Ouija board, I want to tell you what made me a believer. And I think it was my younger sister that got the Ouija board for Christmas one year. And I was like 17 years old. So 1987-ish. Okay. I was like 17, 18, junior or senior in high school. I forget exactly, but it was around that time period. And my sister and I were playing with the board, and she's younger than me. And what we would do is we would always use it in the dining room, and we would face dining room chairs together and put the Ouija board on our laps, and then, play with the Ouija board and use the oracle and speak to the spirits and try to conjure whoever. And again, it was always in the evening. We were home. Dad probably wasn't home from work yet. Mom was making dinner. And I remember this vividly. We were sitting there talking to a spirit that said his name was Uncle Lester. I'm like, Uncle Lester? I was thinking of Uncle Fester from Addams Family, but no, Uncle Lester. Okay, so we're talking to Uncle Lester. And he used to make jewelry. He was telling us about how all the jewelry he used to make, and gold and silver and diamonds and blah, blah, blah. And we're having this conversation, and we're talking aloud as we're reading what the oracle is spelling out. And my mom comes out of the kitchen to us and looking kind of strange. And she's like, wait, what are you guys talking about? And we're like, oh, we're talking to Uncle Lester. And she kind of looks at us funny. I'm like, we never heard of an Uncle Lester. He said he makes jewelry. And that's when she went, oh my God. Like that. I don't think she said anything, but you could tell by the look on her face. She goes, my Uncle Howard made jewelry. And we're like, okay. She goes, but Howard was his middle name. His first name was Lester, and he never liked to use it. So there goes the hairs standing up. And he was a jeweler. And then, so while my mom is telling us this, the oracle, this creeps me out. It's spelled out, Hi Lindy, Lindy. My mom's name is Linda, but Uncle Howard used to call her Lindy. She freaked out. We freaked out. We were done for the night. Needless to say, we were done for the night. But that freaked us out because my sister and I, neither one of us knew of an Uncle Lester or Uncle Howard, or that he was a jeweler. This was like a second uncle to my mom, when she was a little girl, living in Philadelphia and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, that just right there, to me, that story alone is just compelling to me. I mean, that freaked us out. And I keep it to this day because I remember it vividly. And I don't know. So whatever. Were we talking to Lester or Uncle Howard? Were we really talking to him? Was somehow my mom's subconscious out there in the kitchen just feeding us some way, somehow, in the flow and frequency of consciousness? I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? But that experience is really what made me put a lot of faith and belief into the mysticism and the magic of the Ouija board. Is it dangerous? I don't know. Let's get to the next story. Another time, my sister and I were, same thing. It was in the evening. we were in the dining room, chairs facing each other. I'll use the term playing on the Ouija board. And we started talking to a guy. I forget, I forget what he said his name was. I do. And I wish we would have wrote it down or something, because then we really could have dug into the history. But the experience itself was enough for me. So he said, and I'll try to make a long story short, but he said that he died here. And at first, the oracle, and again, the oracle shaped like that teardrop, and it pointed toward the edge and crawled toward the edge of the board that went in the closest direction to where that spring house was located outside of our house and across the street. And at first we're like, wait, you died here in our house? And it went, no, spring. And we're like, what? We're like, the spring house? Yes. Okay. So it pointed in this direction when we were sitting in the dining room. It pointed that way. Anyway, so and we're like, okay, wow, he died in the spring house. And again, we didn't put a lot of value into that because, okay, well, that's something we knew. We heard the story that, they found human remains. So maybe this is something that my sister Dana and I were just conjuring up ourselves. So, but we were asking it, or talking to the spirit and asking questions. And we said, okay, well, where are you right now? And it said, here. Okay, well, can you prove it to us? Yes. Typical kids, right? Oh, yeah, let's make the ghost talk to us and prove it. Okay, well, how can you prove it to us? And it spelled out ring. Well, I remember Dana and I looking down at our hands. Well, we're not wearing any rings. There's no rings here. What do you mean ring? I said, no. Went to no. Then it spelled out phone. Okay. You're going to make the phone ring? Yes. Well, when? And then it went to 5, 2, 7, and then down to goodbye. Okay, so at 5:27, this thing was going to make the phone ring, is what we're thinking. So we get up from the dining room, we go out to the kitchen, and that's where the phone was back then, hanging on the wall with its long cord, and the digital clock on the microwave was at like 5:23 or 5:24. I remember this, man. This is just anyway. So, and we're standing there. My sister and I are standing there. My mom's in the kitchen, and she's like, "Well, what are you guys doing now?" So sure enough, man, as soon as that clock went from 5:26 to 5:27, the phone freaking rang. Not kidding. I let it ring like 3 times, and I picked it up, and I went, hello? Nothing. Not a sound. No background noise, no static, no breathing, nothing. Hello? All right, come on. This is stupid. And I hung up the phone or whatever. Then we get back on the Ouija board. And as soon as we put our hands on the oracle, it started to move, and it spelled out, see, I told you I would do it. Were you scared? Goodbye. So those are my 2 really compelling Ouija board stories. And that's like, I don't know. You can try to call bullshit on it, but I think that there's something to it. There is something mystical and magical. And you know what? As we're getting closer into understanding human connected consciousness and the oneness of consciousness, I think that that's probably where we're going to find the answers. Could something like this be connected to the UAP phenomenon? Could it all just be connected to the other dimension, so to speak? I don't know, but it was weird, very weird. So if you ever had an experience similar with a Ouija board, please drop me a comment. I would love to read about it, love to discuss it with you. If you want to subscribe, please do. I'm going to be talking about more of this kind of stuff. I love discussing, everything from UAPs to UFOs, of course, and the paranormal and mysticism and the mystical and the mysterious. So, but anyway, that's pretty much all I had to discuss this evening. Hope you keep well. Stay in touch.